Okay, second attempt at a Sentai accurate dress for the Lightning Collection Rita Repulsa figure. Let's do this. To begin with, I went back to the pictures Bandora's palace provided me, and looking at those, I decided to label the dress as Tudor inspired, due to the sleeves. This led me to talking to two people, Samantha Reese and, God, I hope I pronounce this correctly, Minjin Linji? I just know I've butchered it, I just know I've butchered that. And these two did confirm details about Tudor dresses. With my research now done, it was time to start drafting a new sewing pattern. I started off by looking at the old sewing pattern because, hey, it was a good place to start. And some things I knew going in were this. I wanted the dress to be able to open up and close at the back, and I wanted to try and minimize how much fabric went into this dress. Now, Rita has a wrap of some sort around her chin, resulting in a lot of black around the neck area. And the figure I'm working with is mostly black anyway, so instead of having a high neckline where there's just some black fabric, I decided to have a low neckline more in line with what an actual Tudor gown would have used, and just zigzag around said neckline to stop it from fraying. Although this actually worked in my favor by surprise in a different way. As I said earlier, I want to minimize how much fabric is in this dress. This newer pattern means I don't have to have darts anymore at the bottom of the torso. Here are the two mock-ups I came up with, and the sewing pattern I decided on because of them was a Frankenstein of the two. I would use the torso and sleeves of the blue dress, but the skirt of the white dress. And with that I was happy, and it was now time to start making the actual dress. Now is a good time to talk about the color of the dress. It's a beige of some sort. However, sometimes it looks darker. Sometimes that's because of lighting, that's because of alterations Power Rangers made to the Jew-Ranger footage. But fundamentally, this lighter beige color is the correct one to go with. And quite frankly, trying to find cotton in this color proved to be a nightmare. I went to multiple stores, none of them had it, but in the end, I went to John Lewis, the fabric department obviously, and they were able to identify it as terracotta. And yes, the members of staff I spoke to did find it funny that I'd been describing it as chocolate milk. But even with an actual name for this color now, trying to get it was a nightmare. You know, it was either the wrong shade or the wrong fabric or something else. And in the end, I ended up on a store called My Fabrics, and they sent me this. Which, I mean, fair enough, this does count as terracotta to the best of my knowledge. But this is more like a plant pot kind of color. So I decided to try dyeing the fabric the color I wanted. And that wasn't great either. It either looked like baby vomit or, well, let's just be polite and say it reminded me of chocolate. I decided to go with the darker shade of brown, partially because there is imagery of the Bandora dress in that darker color, but mostly because it's what was available at fabric stores. And yes, this did render my entire dyeing process completely useless. It's fine. Now, I actually got quite far into the making of this dress, and then this happened. You know how earlier I said I wanted to minimize how much fabric I use? Well, it would appear it had worked a bit too well, and now there just wasn't enough fabric to go into the underarm area of the dress. So this now means a good chunk of the mock-up stage of this project had also been rendered useless. And I'd like to point out both this and the dyeing stages. For both of those, I did have a little helper. So that means it must be bad because quite frankly, she's just never wrong. So I went back to the pattern drafting stage. I decided to merge the sleeves in the torso section into a single piece, and I added these arches in the underarm area, and that actually did help provide the dress with enough fabric so there were no longer any awkward holes under the arm. Now, this next part was inspired by some advice my mother gave, which was, couldn't you just make it baggy? So I decided to look at both the first dress I made and even the dress Hasbro themselves provided, as, say what you will about them, they are dresses that were intended to go on this figure, so something about them must be correct. In the end, I recycled my pleat idea from the first dress, minus the tie-up in the back. And this actually worked better than I thought it would, as the excess fabric takes up so much space in the chest piece of the figure that my original idea of a closure with press studs just isn't really needed anymore. Friction alone is holding this all in place. And you know what's interesting? I dedicated an entire video to just simply criticizing the first dress. And yet so much of that sewing pattern has been reverse engineered into this new one. It's funny how these things work out, isn't it? Moving on. So, I had a new mock-up, and the light was at the end of the tunnel. My mock-up proves this newer pattern works, and it was at this point that I well and truly rage quit. And I didn't look at this for a month. However, that break was actually genuinely needed, as when I got back to action, I could look at it with a fresh perspective. Turns out there was cotton available in a color that was an accurate match for the dress we saw in Jew Ranger. I had just tried too hard to find something that matched the color of the first dress I made. Kinda shot myself in the foot there, didn't I? But I got the fabric, I embroidered on the gold details, I stitched everything up, and it was wrong. Yeah, the fabric moved in a way I didn't want it to move as I was stitching it, hence these weird creases on the torso. Although, I did learn one thing, the skirt needs to be one panel instead of three, because the embroidery gets swallowed up a bit at the seams. So I made a second one, and that turned out okay, and I liked it, and the project was done. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but I found this kind of stressful. One thing I found difficult, even during the parts of the project where things did work out, was that I kept having to remind myself that the dress I saw Mochika Soga wearing on TV was intended to be worn by a flesh and bone person. What I am making, based on that dress, is intended for a toy that is 6 inches tall to wear. It's never going to be a replica of the dress we saw on TV. It's an impression. That's what it has to be. But that being said, I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. All the issues I had with the first dress have been resolved, and she looks great on the shelf with Lord Zed. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go take an aspirin because I've got a headache. Bye.